want to show you a picture on the screen. This was taken on January 6th at the Capitol. And I want to ask you to interact around your tables. Is this a good witness? Should we all be this bold for Jesus? Talk amongst yourselves. Look at the picture. Don't talk to me, talk to each other. Talk around your tables. I'm going to give you a few minutes. Is this a good witness? Should we all be this bold for Jesus? Okay, give me some responses. What are some of your responses? You don't get it? That would be your question. I don't know. I was looking at the guy that had the Kansas City Chiefs jacket on, actually. No. Okay, today we're talking about an electrifying topic. And you are all going to be implicated by this. And so the purpose of today is to try to equip us. And I know we use the word nuance way too much. But words matter. Definitions matter. And clarity matters. And today we're talking about, should you be a Christian nationalist? You're going to be labeled that no matter what you do. Because Christian nationalism has become the slur against anyone who's conservative or Christian or biblical. Christian nationalism is associated with January 6th, because not only were there people there protesting the election results, but there were people carrying Jesus banners. A guy was running through the Capitol with a flag that said Jesus on it, and they've lumped all of this together, at least those who are opposed to this, as Jesus and Trump and red hats and January 6th and election overturning, Second Amendment radicals, homophobic, sexist, woman-hating Neanderthals. And they're putting it all under this banner of Christian nationalism. And so we want to talk about that today, because we need to be living in this culture as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. And that is really a hard metaphor that Jesus gave us. Wise as serpents, as gentle as doves. So let me get you acquainted with it. I'm not as acquainted with this as perhaps I should be, but frankly, some of these movements I don't follow because I just want to try to stay on my own track. But I want to warn you about it. I want to equip you about it. And I want to help you walk through it. You've got it in your notes. Christian nationalism is used as an insult, as a danger sign, and as a slur. Now, part of this comes from the radical left. That nation, even having a nation, is a construct. You know that word? It's an artificially constructed idea. It's a Marxist idea. There really should be no such thing as a nation. So when you describe your nation, you shouldn't be using that term. It's an invented construct. Christian is the nefarious power behind that strategy. In other words, there's some mysterious cabal of Christians out there that are trying to do something to our nation, and it's all happening in the basements of Baptist churches someplace. And usually the term white is attached to the front end of this. It's white Christian nationalism. And you just need to be aware, you're going to hear this a lot, especially from the news media. And so there are some frequently used terms I want you to be aware of. One is the New Apostolic Reformation. It's a kind of a neo-charismatic approach. And I'm not saying it's all wrong. I'm just saying that you're going to hear this used again as an accusation. The New Apostolic Reformation, some people who are associated with that are Charlie Kirk. I don't know if he actually is or not, but he'd be labeled this way. Doug Wilson, who's a pastor in Moscow, Idaho, is often associated with this and actually has some pretty good things to say. I wouldn't agree with everything he has to say. But the New Apostolic Reformation is kind of a neo-charismatic group that believes in apostles and prophets. And they're speaking into what they're talking about, the Reformation of America. And many of the things that they're saying are biblical and they're profitable, but they're also being used as a whipping boy in this whole process. But there are dire warnings coming from the media and from the left, from the secularists, that we are trying to move toward theocracy. Theocracy is what Israel was. It was a nation ruled by God. Remember, God was their king until they came along and said, we want a king like everybody else. And so God said, okay, well, you're going to pay your taxes and your boys are going to be drafted and you're going to spend your time working in the stables of the king because you're rejecting me. But many people are saying, well, you people who want a biblical morality in our culture are really seeking a theocracy. You're seeking power in this way. Here's another word, theonomy. See the word theo, that's God. Nomos is law. We want to have a theological law in our culture. So we want to impose biblical law on the culture. And terms like spiritual warfare are used like, wow, that's like snake handling. You know, when people speak spiritual warfare, when they say even those terms, they're using this to say, well, you're talking about a new crusade. You're talking about weapons and swords and onward Christian soldiers, and you're endangering the separation of church and state, and basically Republicans and Christians are this whole group called Christian nationalism. Well, remember what we're trying to do here is we're trying to say, how do we live in a political world as spiritual men? We're trying to have significant Christian influence with freedom for all. It is the true believer who can actually be tolerant of other religions. We don't have to ascribe what they say. We can say, you believe what you want. We're here to persuade you differently. We want significant Christian influence as Christian men in our culture, and allowing that there's a wide diversity of opinion. So I want to talk to you about Christian nationalism with some qualifications, and qualify them by saying, well, is it all bad? Well, yes and no. So you're going to be frustrated at the end of the day. Well, I'm a nationalist as opposed to a globalist. Even in the example of Israel being taken captive to another nation in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 7, it says, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. That's just a little pinhole snippet of the fact that God establishes order through governance. And wherever you live, whatever state you're in, whatever country you're in, whatever community you're in, you should seek to be a part of that and live as a citizen in that particular culture. So I'm a nationalist as opposed to a globalist, where I don't belong anywhere and it's impossible to govern the entire globe. We are to belong in a culture even as we are spiritual aliens in it. And that's the balance that we have. So it's instead of tribalism. Nationalism is preferable to clan warfare, to the feuds between the clans, in the Ozarks, the tribalism, and against the insular or isolated nature that tribes have. We should be a nation. Here's what it says in Mark 13:10. And the gospel must first be proclaimed to all nations. It's not just, and of course, nation refers to an ethnic group as well. It doesn't always refer to geographical boundaries. But it's very clear in Scripture that there were nations described by their geography as well. And you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. God is not talking about us being a tribe and being isolated and insular from everyone else, a clan that doesn't speak to other people. Christian nationalism gets dangerous when it is applied to a violent takeover. That's what is implied in the slur that's made against this description. In 1 Peter chapter 2, it says, "Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God." So again, a qualification is we're not talking here about violent takeover. Another qualification is this one. This is probably the central one, that it's not about God, the Bible, and the flag all wrapped together. That's what I think you're seeing in that picture that I showed you. Is a Trump and Jesus and the Bible and the flag are all one piece. This is not the direction we want to go. When the symbols of Christianity are melded with a political identity, we need to keep these things separate. We walk in both, but we have to keep them separate in our minds and our hearts. As Jake talked last week, there are things we give to Caesar and there are things we do not give to Caesar. But there are many things due him, but not our hearts. And so it says in 1 John 5:21, "Little children, keep yourselves from idols." And the classic example of this is the Third Reich. Hitler thought that Christians were wimpy, that Christianity would be much more robust if it was Aryan, if it was warlike, if they were warriors instead of being submissive and quiet and pietistic. And so he wanted to revive the church, revise the church into the Reich church. And so he took the Bible off the altar and he put a swastika on the altar and Mein Kampf on the altar. And then he insisted that all the pastors preach in that way. It became the Reich church. And it was Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others who said, no, we're the confessing church and we will keep our confession pure. And they were persecuted for that. Well, that's just one of the examples. But maybe you remember the whole Balkan stuff that was going on in Serbia and Croatia and Bosnia. What religion are the Serbians? Orthodox. What religion are the Croatians? Catholics. What religion are the Bosnians? Muslims. And what you saw was ethnic cleansing on behalf of religion in those countries. That was such a confusing time. I read books on that. I tried to figure out what in the world is going on. And it wasn't about the geographical nations. It was about the people who had wrapped their religion in their nationalism, and they were killing each other all in that vein. Think about the Irish that just reached a settlement, 15 years ago, between the Catholics and the Protestants. Whenever you wrap the Bible in your political agenda and the Bible becomes subservient to your political agenda, you get a Jesus flag at the January 6th. And I think, as Ed said, it can be so misunderstood and so misused against us. Another qualification is that, we're Christians as opposed to secular totalitarians or cultism. Because our secular culture doesn't acknowledge that there's sin in every heart. If you've been listening to my morning devotionals, you've said, well, okay, get off the sin thing, will you? I've been talking about it all, But we should be able, this is Theology 101. When there's a system, a political system, a religious system, whatever it might be, a cultic system that assumes that if my group would just take over, we would have utopia. We should recognize, whoa, there's something basically wrong here. We're not acknowledging the infection and the spread of sin in the human heart. And there has to be checks and balances. And so, as opposed to a totalitarianism that is secular, we do want a Christian influence in our culture. In fact, our whole system of jurisprudence is based on Old Testament law, on the Ten Commandments. It's based on the fact that there's a core morality that we need to have that walks with us into a secular world and seeds and lights and puts yeast into that whole culture. Marxism leads through planned chaos into inevitable oppression. It is always simply destructive. We want to destroy the system, and then when we rebuild it, everything will be fine. And they omit this little thing, this little three-letter word, sin in the heart. So how's that working for you? Soviets, you overthrew the Tsar, and you got Lenin and Stalin. How's that working for you, China? You overthrew the dynasty, and you got Mao, and 40 million people died. We need a Christian influence, because otherwise there are myths that happen about who people are and how they operate. For example, the communist revolution in Russia said, we're going to say that there needs to be collective ownership of all property. So we're all going to work on the farm, and we're all going to share an equal portion of the fruit of this farm. We're all going to meet together and have a happy time in our sort of communal farms. And what happened? Some people were selfish, and they didn't want to work. And so pretty soon people are saying, well, if he's not going to work, I'm not going to work. It just doesn't work. If you don't have a Christian-based, a biblically based system of private property which people invest in, it doesn't conform to the way human beings are made. The one China policy, or the one child policy in China, great idea demographically to slow down the population growth of China. And now there are 100 million men who cannot find a bride. How's that working for you, China? Who knows what chaos that will cause. We have the same thing happening in our culture when you redefine marriage, when you redefine the family. There are places where secular, totalitarian imprints say this is the way it's going to be, regardless of the way people are made and the way God intends for us. You will end up with chaos. So we want to be Christian in that sense. We want to have this kind of influence. We want Christian nationalism. We don't want to have a lack of patriotism and gratitude for our nation. We are living, most of the guys in this room have lived in the most prosperous, freest, greatest half century in human history in this country. So I want to be a patriot. If you want to call me a nationalist, well then go ahead. But I want to be a patriot. I am a patriot. 1 Thessalonians 5:18, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ for you. Another caution, we don't want an unthinking subservience to the state, to Caesar. Jake talked about that last week. I think I talked about it the previous week to some extent. We don't want to be the people that are saying, my country right or wrong. No, we want to be the people who say, no, there are some wrongs, and we need to right them. And where there is systemic racism or injustice, We want to elect, we want to legislate, we want to go to court, we want to dismantle these things that are unjust and unfair. Caesar is due some honor, but Jesus is due all honor. Well, one more caution, at least in my list, is Christian nationalism is opposed to chaos and anarchy. Nationalism is important, and open borders and lawlessness, the lack of enforcement of basic civic decency, which we're seeing on our campuses today, is a danger sign to us. So we want the kind of nationalism that says, hey, we have some order in our culture, and this is God ordained, and when it's legitimately used, it ought to be used both ways. It ought to be used so that we have a culture that we can live in. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur in judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Should be, anyway. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. Okay, I wish I wasn't on videotape. I'm going to give you a couple of tactical things that I think are important. Again, I can be instructed on this. I have not steeped myself in this topic. I have done it enough to know that about these cautions. First of all, I don't think it's wise to use the term Christian nationalism. You'll be misunderstood. It'll be used against you. You cannot explain what you mean by it. It will be taken to the nth degree. It'd be like going to the school board and saying, well, the Bible says spare the rod and spoil the child. How's that going to be received at the school board? It may be true. It may be what you practice. You might do it gently, but they're going to say, oh, yeah, you're a child abuser. So when you say I'm a Christian nationalist, I wouldn't say that in public. I wouldn't advise it. Secondly, when the whole George Floyd thing happened, I can't even remember now when that was, about 4 or 5 years ago, and churches were filled with suddenly all these resources to help us be anti-racist, to help us understand social justice, to show us our white supremacy, and the BLM riots were going on, and I had the audacity to say from the pulpit of this church that the way we approach all of these things is to make disciples for Jesus. If you're a true disciple of Jesus, he will convict you about your racism or your injustice. He will show you how to live in our society in a way that's redemptive. And I don't mean that in some isolated bunker way. I mean, that's what should permeate our culture. We should be seeking to make more and deeper disciples of Jesus, and racism will disappear, and many of these other injustices will as well. Thirdly, don't do your theology in public. Be a witness, tell your story, proclaim the gospel. But what do I mean by don't do your theology in public? There are many things we need to talk about, and we're not being hypocritical about this, but when I talk about doing your theology in public, I'm talking in public about binding Satan, or spiritual warfare, or demons. And these things are all true. I mean, they're all important, but when you say those in a public square, you will look like a snake handler. We have to be very careful. And unfortunately, the wrong people get the microphone. And we need to be very shrewd and very wise. And we need to not deny Jesus by any means. But if we start talking about the role of women or the sufficiency of the cross or the second coming, as important as these are for us, our core belief, people don't understand that. We don't go around shouting, Christ is King, without context. He is the King. But even Jesus didn't announce that early in his ministry. He wanted to be able to heal and teach and bring his hope to them. So be careful about doing your theology in public. And I don't mean to back off your story or your witness. There's probably many things we could talk about there. And then check yourself. Number 4, do we really care about the name of Jesus being honored? Do we really care about that? Or are we just wrapping our political agenda in his name, or vice versa, wrapping his name in our political agenda? Am I just using Jesus for what I want to get politically? I was frankly embarrassed when I saw the January 6th things going on. I wasn't embarrassed politically. I could understand the protest. But when I saw people running through the Capitol with a flag behind them saying Jesus, I knew that would be misused. And it is being misused. Not just this picture I showed you, but many of those situations. And so, I hope you are confused at a higher level. But I hope we'll wrestle with this. This is coming. We're going to be labeled. This is going to be a major campaign issue. It's going to be said, conservatives, Christians are really after a whole new hegemony in the culture, which is white Christian nationalism. It will be used against us. We need to know what that is and what it isn't. I wouldn't use the term, but I think there are parts of it. Yeah, I'm a Christian, and I am a nationalist, but I don't want that label because it'll be used against us. Well, I want you to talk amongst yourselves at your tables, and maybe you should start with question number 3 today, and then have a discussion. Have someone pray for your group to have a Daniel courage and wisdom as we walk in this culture. So somebody start there and then talk about the other 2 questions that are on your list today.